activists with the Professional Staff Congress, the union that represents education workers at the City University of New York. And I'm glad to see a lot of my comrades in the union, the rank and file activists, Gustavo Rivera, I see Ria Raman, Raz Bolo, my colleague Ganesh Trikur. I think we lost a few people. I'm glad others have hung in. And a special salute to my student, former student Karen Ponce, a graduating senior at the College of Staten Island. So in my presentation, I'm going to look at the intensified war on public higher education, especially in the context of the coronavirus, through the lens of Cuny, the City University of New York, the largest urban public university in the country. Now, I argue looking at Cuny provides a window into the broader capitalist attack, not only on public colleges and universities, but the working class as a whole over the last 4+ decades, and how we can fight back. Next slide, Eric. Now, Cuny's precursor, the Free Academy, was established in the mid-19th century through a popular vote as a state-funded college open to all, what it called the whole people. There was always a gap between the promise and the actual operation of the university. So Cuny can best be understood as kind of a canvas in which contestation over who is included, democratic control over the university and its mission and purpose, and the broader struggles in society have played out. In the 1930s, as the photo on the right shows, there were struggles, including Eric Lerner's father, who was a student at City University in the 1930s, who were allied with the Communist Party and other left-wing forces that led major struggles against fascism, war, and for expanding Cuny. In the midst of the Depression, similar to the one we're in now, 3 new colleges, Cuny colleges, were built by the Direct Government Employment Works Progress Administration Program, Lehman in the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens College. So we saw a big expansion through those struggles. In the 1960s, struggles that intersected with the labor, civil rights, and anti-war movements, as depicted on the left, led to the winning of open admissions, which brought Cuny closest to its promises of being open to the whole people. That was won in 1969. Next slide. But beginning in the mid-70s, the empire struck back. In the face of the powerful movements of the 1960s, of which the struggle at Cuny was one important component, the global capitalist class faced a dual crisis of power and profitability. 2 bellwether events in this counterattack were, of course, as Avram mentioned earlier, the 1973 military coup in Chile against the socialist Allende government, and the emerging dual power confrontation. And of course, on the right is Mr. Pinochet, the US's man in Santiago. And the other important event was the 1975 so-called fiscal crisis in New York City, where the banks, federal government, and Federal Reserve, unlike what we see with the trillions being handed out to Wall Street now, refused to buy city bonds and demanded a major restructuring of class relations as the price for quote-unquote help. Among the takebacks, in addition to the massive layoffs and cuts to public services, was the imposition of tuition at Cuny for the first time it was established in 1847. Though a small amount at the time, the ideological message that nothing is free was seen as crucially important message that had to be driven into working class consciousness as part of the new common sense. Next slide. Now, the Better Business Climate Model is a term that I borrow from labor educator Les Leopold, which kind of captures the central features of the capitalist state's post-1970s counter-revolution. Cut taxes on the rich and corporations, slash public services, cut regulation, especially on finance, which helped give rise to the vulture capitalists whose formula was and is to borrow lots of money, load it onto a targeted company, take huge fees, and then make billions more, busting unions, cutting wages, slashing research and development reinvestment, stripping assets, then borrowing more money and using the profits for stock buybacks, and then leave the carcass after have made their billions. A pioneer in these leveraged buyout scams was none other than William Simon, the same Nixon and Ford administration Treasury Secretary who forced austerity on the New York City working class. Indeed, the financial strip mining the vulture capitalists have carried out against workers at various companies is exactly what they are doing to the entire economy, working to the working class as a whole, now on a much larger scale, handing out trillions to Wall Street and then paying for it through massive asset stripping operation of the working class, which what is happening to Cuny is a prime example. Next slide. Now, there were, of course, fightbacks at Cuny against the ruling class agenda imposed in the mid-1970s. In 1989, the Board of Trustees and then Governor Mario Cuomo, the current governor's father, announced a $200 tuition that led to occupation of Hunter College and other campuses, which forced him to back off. The iconic photo on the screen is from the 1989 struggle taken at Federal Hall in Lower Manhattan. Next slide. Though disruptive protest beat back some increases, the attacks continued in the ensuing decades. From a nearly fully funded state institution in 1975, by 1990, 15 years after the imposition of tuition, state support of CUNY's budget was down to 74%. And by 2012, it was down to half. The celebrated People's University was now a public-private partnership. Next slide. Now, in the midst of the 2008 financial crash, Wall Street was, of course, bailed out, and a few crumbs were initially thrown to states and municipalities to cushion the blows. But after the brief lag, the budget acts, particularly against public education, intensified throughout the decade. The graph on the left is the percentage decline in state per student funding in an inflation-adjusted dollars between 2008 and 2016 for public colleges. So you can see, 50% in Arizona, a little bit less in some other states, but these were massive cuts. On the right is the actual dollar amount of the decline by state. There were a few outliers like North Dakota, which had a shale oil boom, which of course has now crashed. No protection for Bismarck this time. Next slide. These figures from the Professional Staff Congress, the union, show that state aid per student at CUNY's four-year colleges, like at Hunter, Roz Bolo graduated at College of Staten Island, where I now teach, declined. There was a decline of 18% for the per student aid coming from the state. And this at a time when there was a significant increase in enrollment. Next slide. So how did CUNY keep its doors open while state support declined? One was to let the doors and larger physical infrastructure literally fall off their hinges. If any tour of CUNY campuses, if you go and take a look, you'll see the buildings and the physical decay is transparent. It's obvious for anyone if you walk through the buildings. Staff has also been cut. At College of Staten Island, where I work, the custodial staff has been slashed by over half in the last few years, with filthy classrooms and often lack of soap and paper in the bathrooms being the obvious and predictable outcome. Next slide. Hold on the other one. Now, the key strategy to managing austerity has been the dramatic increase in the use of super exploited contingent education workers, so-called adjuncts. But far from being supplementary, as the word implies, adjuncts have become essential to running, indeed synonymous with, the austerity university. In 2000, as you can see on the graph, CUNY had approximately 12,000 faculty, about evenly divided between tenure and the lower paid and insecure adjuncts, a number that has increased dramatically since the mid-1970s. But by 2017, 17 years later, adjuncts were nearly 2/3 of all faculty. And if we measure adjunctification by the number of classes and students taught, the percentage is even higher. Next slide. Another management technique, in addition to what our college president euphemistically calls efficiencies, cuts, has been increased tuition, which has risen more dramatically and consistently since 2008, as the graph indicates. Next. Between 2012 and 2016 alone, tuition at the CUNY Senior College, the four-year colleges like CSI, went up 23%. Next. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I saw the banner one morning driving into work at the College of Staten Island, and I knew I had to get out of my car to take a photo, since it captures nicely the message of this presentation: the degradation of public education and the capitalist ideological and material attack on the working class over the 4 decades of this class offensive, right? Buy one, get one free. It's like you're buying toilet paper, right? Next slide. Now, overseeing the attack on CUNY today is Andrew Cuomo, his son, and he's an arm of Wall Street. The upper left is a photo of Bill Mulrow, who comes from the capitalist vulture private equity firm. He was Cuomo's first chief of staff, and he worked for Blackstone. But that should not be confused with their fellow vultures at BlackRock running the Fed bond buying giveaway program. The bottom right is Eric Schmidt from Google, who along with Bill Gates are working to further degrade and monetize public education with Cuomo's invitation. The upper right is representative with the Partnership for New York City, who along with the other political arms of fire, finance, insurance, and real estate are key parts of Cuomo's governing coalition. And the bottom right is the suave Andrew Cuomo kissing the hand of the paramour of real estate baron Andrew Farkas, his former billionaire employer, and kind of representative of the way he's seen the hands of Wall Street in general. Next slide. Now, the picture since the pandemic and ensuing economic implosion, as you all well know, has been trillions handed out by the Fed and Treasury to bail out a bankrupt, as Eric has outlined, a literally bankrupt capitalist system. And now this was being taken out of the hide of the working class. We are paying for this. In New York State, Cuomo, who has been lionized as the sane, reassuring one compared to the lunatic Queens real estate developer, has instituted draconian cuts to education and healthcare, all with the support of feigned opposition from his fellow Democrats who control the entire state government. And the same exact thing is happening in New Jersey, where I live in Newark, and the Newark education worker activists are facing. But he made clear he was just getting started. In the budget just passed in April, he arrogated to himself the powers to institute unilaterally punishing budget cuts 3 times throughout the fiscal year. The first came at the end of April, right now, as he ordered $10 billion in cuts. At CUNY, this is translated with the attempts to fire 25 to 35% of the adjuncts, and they are just getting started. Next slide. So this is the $1 million question. This was the major point behind this teach-in and the popular assembly that we're scheduling in a couple weeks, and we want you all to come And we encourage everyone to stay in touch with us. We'll be sending out the email. You can reach us on Facebook at the Organizing Committee for a Popular Assembly. So how do we fight back? We need to take the Luxembourg road to build for the mass strike. So what is a mass strike? Can anything be done to prepare the ground, right? So first of all, to quote Luxembourg, the mass strike is not something that can be decided at pleasure, a kind of pocket knife that can be kept in the pocket, clasped, ready for an emergency, even when the decision to do so may come from the highest committee of the strongest social democratic party, or today, some self-proclaimed revolutionary parties. When do they appear? They appear when ordinary methods of struggle are defeated because capital is unwilling or unable to yield concession to workers, like we're facing now. Indeed, is requiring concessions from workers in a period in short where a revolutionary transformation of society is needed for workers to move forward. The mass strike becomes the crucial method of workers' activity. And we see many examples throughout American history, globally, the French strikes of 1968. And these are the periods when the major gains have been made, new organizations have been thrown up, such as the mass strikes of 1934, which organized in a couple years industrial workers. Now, the mass strike is not a one-time event like a general strike we still see called by major trade union federations in Europe or Latin America, but a period that can extend over months and even years, that combines political and economic, workplace and social reproduction demands, and unites unionized and non-unionized and workers across various divides, gender and race, nationality, legal status, and forges in the mass strike the new democratic organs. Worker council, popular assemblies also emerge in the process. Now, while Luxembourg emphasized that we are not able to call a mass strike, organizers can help prepare the soil by getting movements, organizations like Newark Education Workers, Rank and File Action at Cuny, and parties to agree, like the PSOL, the Party of Socialism and Liberation, to agree on a broad, concrete set of demands, right? We cannot agree A to Z, right? But we can agree on a broad, concrete demands and struggles to win them, right? We have to get out of our silos and come together in agreement on some common demands and actions. Thus, if we can do that now, when the mass strike emerges, activists are better positioned to intervene and advance these struggles with, to quote Luxembourg again, the lively agitation for the extension of demands, since they have already become popularized by previous struggles. They are ready at hand. In addition, if forging popular direct democracy organs, right, like the Popular Assembly, where we agree on demands and actions, that helps prefigure those that will emerge in the mass strike, which is also crucial for preparing the ground. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, on June 6th, we're preparing here a regional popular assembly to agree on common demands and actions, and we encourage these to happen all around the country. We have people from California here, down in New Orleans. We hope you will forge similar popular assemblies to agree on demands and actions, and this will emerge into a national popular assembly. Now, what before you are 4 broad demands that are, we will decide next meeting whether these will be presented at the popular assembly in the New York, New Jersey area. But these, again, are informed by the Luxembourg idea of uniting political and economic demands, of raising demands that address all our different movements, not just in our separate silos. Okay, so the first demand is all who live here have equal have equal rights, right? All the undocumented, formerly incarcerated, right? At Cuny, where I teach, many students are formerly incarcerated, or some. Many are immigrants, undocumented immigrants, right? To be able to build this struggle, we have to have equal rights for all who live here. It's a key. That's one of the demands that will be debated and discussed and voted upon. Another is free public service. Yes, a free CUNY, but we need much more than that, right? As the rank and file student organization at CUNY is called for, free housing, free healthcare, free transportation, right? And we have to be clear, the ruling class has to pay for this. We have to take back the trillions that they have stolen, which Eric Lerner's presentation has outlined very well, and end the US war machine in order to finance this massive expansion of free public services. Thirdly, we need jobs for all. Creating this free public services program would create a massive number of jobs that we desperately need right now with record unemployment, right? We are facing depression era levels of employment. And this is not just a result of the pandemic. This is a deep crisis in the capitalist system. And then finally, we need to, and as Eric's presentation also underscores, the socialization of finance. We need the federal ownership of all finance, banks, insurance, investment companies with democratic control. We have bailed the capitalist system out twice over with bailouts. We need to take ownership over that. So this is what we're going to be presenting. This is kind of, again, an idea of a set of demands that unite our various struggles. And then, of course, we need to decide on common actions where we can work together to begin making advances, all right? The only way we're going to begin to even get concessions at this point, right? They're not giving out any of that, is if we have a unified movement fighting for the world we want. So we need to have an agreement on this broader program to be effective. Next slide. But we also can link that to immediate demands in our particular struggles, right? So these are some that we came up with to immediately confront the pandemic, right? At Cuny, where we're struggling, right, facing immense cuts. In Newark, the Newark education workers, right? The liberal Democratic government is planning massive cuts to the education budget, laying off 100,000 state public workers. We're going to be seeing the same thing in New York. We have to have some immediate demands in response to those attacks that connect to our broader program. So I'm going to end there. I really am hoping to hear your questions, and even more so, look forward to your participation. I can see Carol Lang here and others in the popular assembly in the New York, New Jersey region. These will proliferate around the country to follow the Luxembourgist road to the mass strike, which we desperately need.